keeping English smooth and enjoyable.
Okay, so you're ready to really master English conversation, right? You want to be smooth and confident and sound like a natural, and you found this awesome guide. It promises to fast track you to fluency. And I gotta admit, it's got some seriously good stuff in it. So in this deep dive, we're gonna take it apart together. We'll pull out those practical tips, the ones that actually work. You don't need to read through pages and pages. We're gonna get right to the good stuff. And get this, it even gives you some really simple ways to handle those scary speaking jitters.
What's really cool about this guide is that it doesn't just throw these grammar rules at you. It starts with a strong base, yeah. But it does it in a way that makes sense. It's easy to understand.
I know, right? It shows you grammar is important, but it doesn't get lost in all the technical stuff. Instead, it focuses on simple structures like the subject-verb-object thing.
It's like a blueprint for making any sentence. Start with a basic phrase like, I eat pizza. Super simple, right? But then you can change it up a bit, like add an adverb, maybe an adjective. Throw in a dependent clause or something. And boom, you've got, yesterday I devoured a delicious cheesy pizza with my friends. See, now it's like you're painting a picture with words.
Yeah.
And it all started with that same easy structure.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. So we got the structure of our sentences down. What about the actual words we use, the vocabulary? I bet a lot of people freak out when they think about memorizing a whole dictionary.
Yeah, and the guide totally gets that. It doesn't try to bury you in a mountain of words. It just says, focus on 5 or 10 common words every day. The trick is choosing words you'll actually use, in everyday conversations. Oh, and here's a little hack. Learn words in a sentence. That'll help you remember them way better. Like, instead of just remembering delicious, remember in that pizza sentence we made? Yesterday, I devoured a delicious cheesy pizza with my friends.
So it's about starting small and building confidence, right? Those little wins that keep you motivated. Speaking of small wins, the guide talks a lot about mastering those essential conversational phrases, the stuff you'd need to survive in a real situation.
Exactly. Think of it like your language survival kit. Ordering food, asking for directions, chatting with someone at a cafe. The basics.
Right. It's not like you're having deep philosophical debates. It's just those everyday interactions. Okay, so we've got the groundwork, grammar, vocabulary, those key phrases. Now, the guide shifts gears and talks a lot about listening. It wants you to immerse yourself in spoken English every single day. Podcasts, movies, TV shows, whatever you like, anything to get those ears working.
Absolutely. But there's something people often miss, and this guide nails it. Intonation. It's not just about the words themselves, it's about how they're said. Intonation, it's like adding emotion, like music to your speech. So it makes you sound natural and engaging, like you're really part of the conversation.
It's like the difference between reading sheet music and actually feeling the music. But how do we work on our intonation, as learners?
That's where the guide's advice about speaking aloud comes in. Even if it's just to yourself. I know it might sound weird, but think of it like a musician practicing scales or an athlete doing drills. You're training your mouth to make the sounds, to get comfy with the rhythm of English.
Oh, so it's like subconscious training. You're not really focused on grammar or fancy words. You're just getting your mouth used to speaking. I remember I felt silly doing that at first, but I gotta say, it really helped.
Me too.
Yeah.
And you know what goes great with speaking aloud? Recording yourself.
Okay, before you freak out and think, ugh, not another recording, this isn't about being perfect. It's about noticing those little things we don't hear when we're just speaking. Are we talking too fast? Is our tone flat? Are we stressing the right sounds?
Exactly. And this is where actively listening comes in again. By listening to your recordings, you can spot those areas where you might need to adjust. You can start to hear how a native speaker might hear you. And then you can tweak things.
I love how this guide connects everything together. It's not just random tips, it's like a whole approach to fluency.
Yeah, totally. And part of that approach is tackling the biggest thing for language learners. Fear. That fear of making mistakes, of sounding silly, of not being understood.
I get it. It can be scary. But the guide actually has some really simple advice for that. Start small.
It's tempting to jump into hard topics right away, but the guide says hold back, resist that urge. Instead, start with easy conversations about your day, your hobbies, the weather, stuff you're already comfortable talking about in your own language.
So build that confidence first, right? Get those conversations going without the pressure of fancy words or grammar.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting. The guide says we need to embrace mistakes.
Yeah.
See them as chances to learn.
That is so important. We need to change our thinking. Stop seeing mistakes as failures and see them as stepping stones to fluency.
Every time you trip over a word or phrase, every time someone corrects you, you're actually learning something valuable. You're getting better, more confident, more fluent.
I love that. Turn those awkward moments into fuel for growth, right? Now, the guide also gives us some practical tools to boost our confidence. One that really stood out to me was language learning apps.
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of those too,
Yeah.
especially for someone who's all about efficiency and wants to make their learning fun. The great thing about these apps is they give you real-time feedback from native speakers. It's like having your own personal language coach in your pocket.
Exactly. You can practice your pronunciation, test your vocabulary, even have mock conversations, and you get instant feedback. It takes the guesswork out of learning and makes it way less intimidating.
And speaking of being less intimidated, the guide talks about something called role-playing.
I've heard of that, but never tried it. Is it like mentally rehearsing conversations in your head?
Exactly. Let's say you're nervous about ordering food at a restaurant. Imagine yourself there. Think about what you'll say, and practice the conversation in your mind. You could even try different versions, like what to say if they don't have what you want, or if you need to ask about the ingredients.
So you're creating a mental script so that when you're actually in that situation, it feels familiar and less scary.
You got it. And this goes back to what we said about those small wins.
Right.
By practicing these everyday situations, you're building your confidence and setting yourself up for success in real life.
Okay, so we've covered the basics. Grammar, vocabulary, listening, intonation. We talked about overcoming fear and some great ways to boost confidence. But what about sounding really fluent, like a native speaker? The guide has some advanced tips for that, starting with idioms and slang.
This is where things get fun, but also where you need to be careful. Idioms are those phrases that don't always make sense literally, but they add color and personality to the language. Like saying someone kicked the bucket doesn't actually mean they kicked the bucket, right? It means they died.
And slang is even trickier. It changes all the time and can be different in different places.
Exactly. The guide says we should learn idioms and slang from movies, TV shows, music, anything that shows us how native speakers actually use the language.
It's like becoming a cultural detective, picking up on those subtle cues that show you're in the know, that you understand English beyond just the textbook definitions.
But remember, context is everything. Idioms and slang can backfire if you use them wrong.
Oh, I can imagine some pretty funny mix-ups happening there. So it's important to pay attention to how native speakers use them, maybe even ask for clarification if you're not sure.
Exactly. And that leads us to the guide's last tip for becoming truly fluent. Join English-speaking groups. It could be a conversation club, a book club, a hiking group, anything, as long as you can interact with native speakers in a relaxed setting.
It's like creating your own little English-speaking world, where you can practice everything you've learned in a real-world environment.
And it gives you that feeling of community, that sense of belonging that's so important for language learners. It reminds you that you're not alone, that other people are going through the same challenges and celebrating the same wins.
I love that. It's like turning learning into a social adventure.
Exactly. And this brings us to the big theme of this whole guide. Consistency is key. Make English part of your everyday life, even if it's just for a few minutes at a time.
And celebrate those small wins along the way. Every conversation, every new word, every time you feel a little more confident. Those are all wins worth celebrating.
Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I'm curious to hear what's sticking with you, what's got you interested. What tip are you going to try out today? Keep thinking about that as we head into part 2, where we'll explore even more ways to level up your English conversation skills. So welcome back. I hope you've had some time to think about those basic strategies we talked about in part 1. Are you ready for some more specific techniques? This guide really gets into the details here. It gives you some practical tips to make your conversations even better.
Yeah, I really liked how the guide doesn't just tell you what to do, but also why. That makes it so much more helpful, you know?
I know, right? For example, remember we talked about speaking aloud? Well, the guide goes deeper and says, active listening is super important when you practice. It's not just talking. It's really hearing and understanding the other person.
It even suggests recording your practice conversations and then listening back, not just to yourself, but to how the other person responds too. That's a cool idea. I never thought of that.
It's so helpful. You know, good communication is like a dance. It goes both ways. By really listening to the other person, you pick up on those little things, their tone of voice, the words they choose, even their pauses, and that helps you give better responses that are more relevant and keep the conversation going. It's about connecting with the other person, sharing ideas and feelings.
I like that, the dance analogy. It really captures what a good conversation is all about.
Exactly. Now, another thing the guide talks about is shadowing. Have you ever tried that?
I've heard of it, but I'm not sure I really get it.
Oh, it's super easy, but really works. You find a recording of a native speaker. It could be a podcast, an audio book, a YouTube video, whatever. Anything where someone is speaking naturally and fluently. Then you listen and try to copy their pronunciation and intonation, like right away as they're speaking, almost like you're their shadow, echoing their voice.
Oh, I see. So it's not just understanding what they're saying, it's actually trying to make the same sounds, copying the rhythm and the way they speak.
Exactly. It's like training your ears and your mouth to work together, to learn those little things that make native speakers sound so smooth. I remember when I first tried shadowing, it felt a little weird, but the more I did it, the more natural it became.
Yeah, I can see how that would help you to sound more authentic, with a better accent and rhythm. Speaking of feeling more authentic, the guide also suggests making English part of your everyday life, not just during practice sessions.
Yeah, that's a big one, especially if you want to learn efficiently. And make the most of your time. It's about finding those little moments throughout the day to immerse yourself in the language. So it's always there, not just something you do for an hour and then forget.
Okay, give me some examples. I'm always looking for new ways to fit more English into my day.
Well, there are tons of things you can do. You could read a news article in English while you eat breakfast, or listen to an English podcast on your way to work. Change your phone's language to English. Even just thinking about your day in English can help. You're basically training your brain to think in English, so it becomes more automatic.
So it's like constantly exposing yourself to the language, even in small ways. And the guide says that's really effective for making those connections in your brain.
Exactly. It's a small change in how you think, but it makes a big difference over time. Now let's talk about vocabulary. The guide recommends something called spaced repetition. It sounds complicated, but it's actually really simple, and it works incredibly well.
That rings a bell, but remind me how it works.
Okay, so basically, our brains are designed to forget things. We've all crammed for a test before, right? And then a few days later, poof, it's gone. Spaced repetition uses that natural forgetting process. It reminds you to review things at longer and longer intervals. So instead of trying to learn a ton of new words all at once, you spread it out over time.
Ah, so it's like tricking your brain into remembering. And there are apps that can help you with this, right?
You bet. There are tons of great apps for spaced repetition. They show you a word, then quiz you on it a few days later, then a week later, and so on. As you get better at remembering the word, the time between reviews gets longer. It's like having a personal vocabulary trainer that knows exactly when you need a reminder.
So you're working smarter, not harder. I like the sound of that. The guide also emphasizes learning high-frequency words.
Oh yeah, those are key. High-frequency words are the ones you hear and use the most. By focusing on those, you're getting the most out of your effort. You're building a solid vocabulary that'll help you in most situations.
It's like laying the foundation, right? Creating that strong base for your fluency. But then, for those who are feeling adventurous, there's the world of idioms and slang. Those are always fun, but can be tricky.
Idioms are those expressions that make the language more colorful. But like we said before, they don't always make sense literally, which can lead to some funny and sometimes awkward moments.
Oh, I totally get it. I once tried to use the idiom break a leg to wish my friend good luck before a presentation. They looked at me like I was crazy. I had no idea it was only for performing arts.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a perfect example of how idioms can backfire if you don't know the context. And slang is even harder. It changes so fast, and it can be different depending on who you're talking to.
So how do we learn all this without messing up? I mean, I want to sound cool and natural, but I don't want to sound like I'm trying too hard. Or even worse, offend someone.
The best way is to be curious and humble. Watch movies, TV shows, listen to music and podcasts. Pay attention to how native speakers use idioms and slang. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Most people are happy to explain those expressions to you.
It's like being an anthropologist, right? Studying the details of a new culture. And just like with any culture, respect is important.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot in this part. Active listening, shadowing, using English every day, spaced repetition, high-frequency words, and the tricky world of idioms and slang. There are so many different ways to become fluent.
That's a good point. The guide says there's no one right way. The key is to find what works best for you. Try different things and adjust as you go. And most importantly, remember that language learning is a journey, not a destination.
It's a process of constantly discovering and improving, an adventure that lasts a lifetime.
And while it's great to have a goal in mind, that vision of yourself speaking English perfectly, it's also important to enjoy the journey itself and celebrate those small wins along the way.
For sure. Every conversation, every new word you learn, every time you overcome your fear and express yourself, those are all reasons to celebrate. Now, as we get ready for the last part of our exploration, I want to hear from you. What's been the most helpful so far? What technique are you most excited to try? Think about that as we move into the realm of even more advanced strategies for mastering English conversation.
We're back for the final part of our fluency journey, and I'm pumped for these advanced strategies. This guide doesn't mess around. It wants you to totally own English conversations.
You know, that's what I love about this section. It's like it's pushing you to think outside the box,
Yeah.
beyond the grammar and vocab lists. It's about being creative and strategic with your communication.
Okay, you got me hooked. Where do we start?
Well, one thing that really surprised me was the emphasis on storytelling. And I'm not talking about memorizing fairy tales or anything. It's more about recognizing that. We all tell stories. It's how we connect with people and
Yeah.
share our experiences, right? So the guide wants you to use that. Weave your thoughts and ideas into stories, even in casual conversations.
So instead of just saying, I had a long day, you could say something like, you won't believe what happened to me today. It all started with, and then launch into a little anecdote. That would definitely make things more interesting.
Exactly. And here's the cool part. When you tell stories, you're not only making things more engaging, you're also practicing your grammar, vocabulary, and sentence structure without even realizing it.
It's like a sneaky grammar workout. I like it. The guide even suggests using storytelling to practice verb tenses. That's way more fun than boring conjugation drills.
Right. It makes grammar come alive. Now, another technique I found really helpful is the idea of active vocabulary building.
I think I know what you mean, but tell me more. It's not just about flashcards, is it?
No way. It's about actively looking for new words.
Yeah.
And then actually using them in your conversations. Like, let's say you come across the word exquisite. Don't just write it down and forget about it. Try to use it in a sentence that day, even if it feels a little awkward at first.
So it's about pushing yourself to use new words, even if you're not totally comfortable with them yet.
Exactly. The more you use a word, the more natural it becomes. It's like adding a new tool to your language toolbox. The guide even suggests setting a goal, like how many new words you'll try to use each day. It's a fun little challenge.
I like that. It makes it feel more like a game.
Okay, so for those who are ready to take things to the next level, the guide talks about debate and discussion.
Yeah, this is where you really get to test your skills. It encourages you to have structured debates on topics that you're passionate about. You could do this with other learners or even native speakers if you're feeling brave.
I mean, that would be so helpful. It makes you think critically, express your ideas clearly, and defend your opinions. It's like a workout for your brain.
And you also get exposed to different perspectives, different ways of thinking and expressing yourself. It helps you understand the language and the world better.
So it's not just about fluency. It's about becoming a better communicator overall. Now, the guide also acknowledges that mastering conversation isn't just about the language itself. It's also about understanding cultural differences and social norms. That's so true. What's considered polite in one culture might be totally different in another. The guide suggests watching how native speakers interact. Pay attention to their body language, their tone of voice, and how they talk to each other. It's about picking up on those unspoken rules.
It's like becoming fluent in the culture as well as the language.
Exactly. And it's something you're always learning. Even native speakers are always adapting and changing. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one of the most important messages from the guide. Never stop learning.
That's right. Fluency isn't a finish line, it's a journey. There will always be new words to discover, new expressions to master, new things to learn about different cultures.
And the best part is, the more you learn, the more you realize how much more there is to explore. It's an adventure that never ends, and it's full of amazing rewards.
Well said. So, to everyone listening, as you start your own journey towards fluency, remember that every conversation is a chance to learn, a chance to improve your skills, connect with others, and express yourself in new and exciting ways. Embrace the challenges, celebrate your successes, and always keep that sense of curiosity alive. Happy practicing a